When your own father looks you in the eyes and says, "You're just a burden," something inside you breaks, and when your mother nods, it shatters. That night, I didn't eat dinner. I sat there, fork in hand, staring at the chipped plate in front of me, while my father shoveled mashed potatoes into his mouth like nothing had happened. Like he hadn't just said the most soul-crushing thing a daughter could ever hear. Like he hadn't looked at me with disgust. Me, the woman who had spent the last 5 years of her life caring for him after his surgery, keeping this house from falling apart, cooking his meals, buying his medication, and covering half the bills on a part-time income. And Mom, she didn't even blink. Just gave this slow, solemn nod like she agreed. Like it was the truth she'd been waiting to say herself. It wasn't the first time they made me feel small, but this was different. It was loud, direct, final. A statement meant to cut. I didn't speak. I didn't cry, not in front of them. I quietly picked up my plate, dumped the food into the trash, and walked to my room. But that sentence followed me like a curse. "You're just a burden." I sat on the edge of my bed for hours that night. No TV, no light, just the blue glare of my phone screen illuminating the emptiness inside me. I stared at my banking app, flicking between tabs, credit card balance, checking account, savings. My savings sat there like a safety net I'd worked hard to build after losing my job during the layoffs 2 years ago. I had moved back home reluctantly, just until I could get back on my feet. That was the plan. But somehow, I became the unpaid nurse, cook, and housekeeper. Somehow, the months turned into years, and the woman who once had her own apartment, her own car, her own identity, slowly disappeared. Now I was just the burden. I curled under my blanket and stared at the ceiling, trying to understand where it all went wrong. I wasn't perfect. God knows I'd made mistakes, but I loved them. I showed up. I sacrificed. And that still wasn't enough. The next morning I woke to silence. No coffee brewing, no political news blaring from the living room, no sound of Dad coughing down the hall. At first, I thought maybe they had gone out for a walk or to the store, but their car wasn't in the driveway. I searched the kitchen counter and found a note. "Gone for a break. Don't call." That's all it said. Gone for a break. Like I was some kind of weight they had to escape from. I checked my phone. No missed calls, no texts, nothing from either of them. I sat down at the kitchen table, numb, and pulled up my banking app again, just out of habit. But this time, my heart dropped. $0. I blinked, refreshed the app, checked again, still zero. I felt ice run through my veins as I clicked into the transaction history. 3 large withdrawals, one just 2 days ago, another last night, and the final one this morning, today. The name listed? Henry Carter, my father. I forgot. The account had been opened years ago in both our names. I used to be his emergency contact. We added each other for banking access during his surgery years ago, when things were good. I never removed him. I dropped the phone, breath catching in my throat. He didn't just call me a burden, he emptied my savings and left. The room spun. I gripped the table like it could anchor me, but it couldn't. The betrayal was dizzying, blistering. I had heard of parents doing cruel things, cutting children off, favoring others. But this felt like a robbery. A personal, deliberate betrayal from the two people who were supposed to be my last safe place. They didn't just walk out. They took everything. And all I could do was sit in the silence, surrounded by walls I no longer trusted, trying to remember how I ever thought I belonged here. The house felt colder than usual that morning. Even with the sun filtering through the kitchen windows, it was like someone had opened every door to let the warmth escape. I stood barefoot in front of the refrigerator, numb, rereading that note like it might grow a new sentence. But no, it still just said, "Gone for a break, don't call." No love, Mom and Dad. No explanation. Just a dismissal. I poured myself a glass of water with shaky hands, and as I sipped it, my mind raced. Had they, had they really just taken off? With everything? My savings, the small emergency fund I'd scraped together doing freelance gigs and weekend shifts? I pulled up the banking app again and clicked into each transaction. 3 withdrawals, one from a local ATM, late at night, another from a transfer to a debit card I didn't recognize, and the third, an international transaction alert, flagged but still approved. I called the bank. After 10 minutes of hold music, a polite woman named Kimberly answered. I gave her my account info and told her what I'd found. My voice trembled as I said my father's name. When she asked if I'd authorized the transfers, I told the truth. No, I didn't. I had no idea he even still had access. There was a pause. Then she gently said, "Because your account was jointly opened under both names, the system didn't flag it as suspicious activity until the international use this morning." International. Do you know where the card was used? I asked. Another pause. Paradise Island, Bahamas. I dropped into a chair. Of course, they hadn't just gone for a break. They were sunbathing on a beach somewhere with my money. Kimberly continued, explaining the process of filing a fraud complaint, even in cases of joint accounts. But I barely heard her. My ears buzzed, my skin flushed hot. I wanted to scream, throw something, anything to match the chaos in my chest. But I didn't. I thanked her, ended the call, and just sat there. I opened my social media, more out of spite than curiosity. And there it was, a photo. Mom in sunglasses, reclining on a lounger with a tropical drink in hand. Dad beside her, shirt unbuttoned, smiling wide like the world hadn't burned behind him. The caption from her account read, "Finally taking time for us. Hash deserved, hash freedom, hash no drama." No drama. That hashtag hit like a slap. Were I the drama they escaped from? The woman who cooked their meals? The woman who paid their internet bill last month? The daughter who clipped coupons and picked up their prescriptions while they acted like guests in the home that I scrubbed clean every Saturday? I stared at the screen, bile rising. And then, beneath the photo, a comment from my cousin appeared. "So happy for you both. You deserve peace away from all the stress." All the stress? They were talking about me. That's when something inside me snapped, not in a loud, chaotic way, but in a sharp, cold way. The kind of clarity that hits when the fog lifts and you finally see what's been there all along. They didn't just take the money. They abandoned me, after using me, after bleeding me dry. And the worst part? I had let them, because I believed that if I kept giving, they'd finally love me the way I deserved. That someday, I'd no longer feel like the background character in my own family. But that someday wasn't coming. They weren't coming back for me. I stood up, walked through the living room, and paused at the mantel where old family photos lined the wall. I stared at a photo from Christmas 5 years ago, back when I still believed this house held love. I reached up and took it down, then another, and another, until the shelf was bare. That afternoon, I sat on the floor with a garbage bag full of those memories, and finally asked the question I should have asked a long time ago. What do I want from this life if I'm not constantly trying to be worthy in theirs? And then I remembered something, a piece of paperwork I'd almost forgotten existed. A deed, tucked inside a locked drawer in my bedroom, with my name on it. The house wasn't theirs anymore. They'd signed it over to me years ago for tax reasons. I didn't think much of it at the time, but suddenly, it felt like the last card in a game I didn't know I was playing. And for once, I had it in my hand. The deed was right where I remembered it, bottom drawer, behind a stack of old utility bills and expired insurance folders. I sat cross-legged on the floor of my bedroom, holding the thick manila envelope like it might burn through my hands. My fingers trembled slightly as I opened it and slid out the paperwork. Owner, Elena Marie Carter. Property address, 129 Cedar Ridge Lane. Date of transfer, March 14th, 2020. I blinked. They'd transferred the house to me 5 years ago, back when Dad was sick and we were all so terrified of losing everything. I remember Mom pushing the papers toward me across the kitchen table like it was nothing. "It'll just make things easier," she had said, "in case anything happens." At the time, I thought it was love, trust, proof that I mattered. Now it felt like irony. They had signed it over for convenience, never thinking I'd actually hold them accountable, never thinking I would read the fine print. But I did. And as I stared at the signature, my father's shaky scrawl, my mother's tight script, I realized something with absolute clarity. This house is mine. I wasn't squatting here. I wasn't some unwanted guest. I owned this place. The kitchen, the garden, the roof they slept under for free, every room they walked through while belittling me. Mine. I stood and looked around, really looked. The walls I had painted, the floor I had mopped, the rugs I had vacuumed when Mom said the house was starting to smell like you live here too much. Well, now it was going to. I poured myself a cup of black coffee and sat at the dining table with the deed in front of me, next to my phone. I opened social media again. Their second vacation post had gone up. This one was worse. Mom wore a wide-brimmed hat, clinking glasses with another couple. The caption read, "Meeting new friends while we finally enjoy life. Hashtag stress-free living. Hashtag no guilt. Starting over." I zoomed in and noticed something tucked beside her lounge chair. My laptop bag. I gasped. They took my laptop. It had my freelance contracts, my side business files, my resume, everything, and they packed it like a travel accessory. I scrolled through the comments. My aunt commented, "You both deserve this break after everything you've done for others." Others. Meaning me? That's when I pulled out a legal pad from the drawer and began writing. Everything I knew. Timeline, transfers, items missing, screenshots of their social posts, copies of bank records I had emailed to myself. By the time the sun set, I had a full list of evidence ready. And then I called someone I hadn't spoken to in nearly 6 years. Lily Adams, my former college roommate, now an attorney. We hadn't talked much after I left school, but I remembered her kindness. And more importantly, I remembered that she specialized in civil fraud and elder financial abuse cases. She picked up on the second ring. "Hello?" "Lily, it's Elena." A pause. "Elena? Wow, it's been years." "I know, and I'm sorry to jump back in like this, but something happened, and I think I need legal help." I heard the chair creak as she sat up straighter. "Are you okay?" I told her everything. I didn't sugarcoat it. I didn't pretend I was fine. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then she said, "Do you have access to the deed? Proof the house is in your name?" "Yes." "And the money they took, can you show a pattern of access or misuse?" I emailed her the documents on the spot. After a few minutes, she whistled. "Elena, this is bad, but it's also actionable." I didn't expect that word. Actionable? You can file a civil claim for financial abuse and fraud. And given the house is in your name, you can legally begin an eviction process. They're not on the title anymore. I didn't know what to say. "Do you want to pursue this?" she asked, her voice steady. I stared out the window, down the quiet street I'd known all my life. The same street I walked as a child, where I learned to ride a bike, where I helped my dad fix gutters, where I sat on the porch crying after my first breakup, and where my parents just left me like garbage they didn't want to carry on vacation. "Yes," I said, "I want to pursue it." "Then I'll help you," Lily replied. "And Elena?" "Yeah? This isn't payback. This is protection. From now on, You start protecting you. I hung up the phone and stared at the deed again. It didn't feel like paper anymore. It felt like a sword. The house was quiet, too quiet. Even with the blinds open and the sun spilling across the hardwood floors, there was a hollowness that echoed louder than any shouting ever could. I sat in the living room with a mug of cold tea clutched in both hands and stared at the spot on the wall where the family photo used to hang. I had taken it down the day before. Not out of anger, but because I couldn't stand to see their smiling faces anymore, like they were still the people I used to believe in. I once thought love was enough. That being a good daughter, doing what was asked, staying behind when everyone else moved forward, would eventually mean they'd love me back with the same weight I carried for them. But that was a fantasy I'd sold myself. I was never enough. Not for them. Not when I made straight A's in school. My sister barely passed her classes, but she got a car at 16. I got a pat on the back and told to stop showing off. Not when I stayed home after college to help with Dad's rehab. My parents told everyone I was still figuring things out, like I hadn't given up a marketing job I loved to come back and be their unpaid nurse. Not when I paid off their overdue electricity bill with my last paycheck. They didn't say thank you. They told me next time I should learn to budget better. Even now, even after they gutted my savings and walked away from the life I put on hold to serve theirs, I still felt this sick guilt creeping in. What if they really were just tired? What if I was too sensitive? What if they didn't mean it? Then I remembered that stupid social media caption, "No drama." And suddenly I wasn't sad anymore. I was furious. I went upstairs to the spare bedroom, the one they always told me wasn't really mine, even though I had lived in it since I was 12, and opened the closet. Inside were dusty photo albums, old boxes labeled with my name, and some of Mom's old coats. One box was labeled, Elena, High School. I pulled it down and opened it slowly. Inside were my old report cards, honor roll certificates, a few medals from track, and a folded essay I had written in 10th grade titled, Why I Admire My Father. I stared at my teenage handwriting. Back then, he was my hero. Back then, I still believed he wanted me. The tears came unexpectedly, sharp, hot, not from weakness but from years of being shoved to the side, of being the filler child, the backup plan, the emotional sponge they wrung dry. And then, I saw something I forgot existed, a pink envelope with my name on it. I opened it. Inside was a birthday card. Happy 18th, Elena. We're so proud of you. Love, Mom and Dad. The words felt like a lie now, a cruel joke written in fake affection. Because just weeks after that birthday, they asked me to co-sign a loan for Dad's surgery. I was 18. I didn't understand what it meant. I signed because I loved him. Because I believed them when they said they'd never let me carry that debt alone. Spoiler, they did. By the time I was 25, I had paid over $22,000 toward that loan while they went on a cruise to Mexico. And still, they called me a burden. I packed that box up with shaking hands and carried it downstairs. I dumped the contents on the living room floor and began sorting. Some things I'd burn, some I'd toss. And one item, a small framed photo of me and my sister as kids, I kept. Not because I still believed in what it showed, but because it was proof that I'd tried. Proof that I had existed in this family before they decided I didn't belong. Later that evening, I opened a spreadsheet on my phone and tallied every bill I'd paid over the last 4 years. Groceries, medical supplies, gas, mortgage, every little favor I gave without question. The total? $48,930. That number hit me harder than I expected. I had supported 2 able-bodied adults who treated me like an afterthought. I had paused my life for people who never once asked if I needed help restarting it. And now they were sipping wine in the Bahamas with my laptop and my money while I counted receipts. I didn't just want closure anymore. I wanted justice. So I called Lily again, told her I was ready to move forward with everything. Her response was calm but firm. Then let's begin. First, document everything. Next, we file. And after that, you change the locks. It was the first time in weeks I put on makeup and wore something other than sweatpants. I stood in front of the mirror, tightening the belt around my coat like armor, and stared at the woman looking back at me. She looked tired, yes, but no longer broken. I didn't walk into the bank like a daughter. I walked in like a woman reclaiming what was hers. The same local branch I used to stop by to deposit my freelance checks now felt different, sterile, unforgiving. The place where my father had stood and calmly moved my money, my security, into his pocket. The clerk at the front desk greeted me with a tight smile. "I'm here to speak to the branch manager," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "Name?" "Elena Carter." She glanced at her screen. "Let me check if Ms. Ramirez is available." A few moments later, a tall woman in a navy suit came forward and extended her hand. "Ms. Carter, I'm Cecilia Ramirez. Come with me." Her office was bright and modern, with a framed poster about fraud prevention on the wall. I stared at it while she settled in. "I understand you're disputing transactions on a joint account," she began, folding her hands neatly. "Yes. My father and I opened the account years ago when he was going through surgery. I forgot his name was still on it. Last week, he drained the entire balance and used part of it overseas." "Do you have documentation?" I handed over the folder I had printed that morning. 3 flagged transactions, my own bank statements from the last year, screenshots of text messages where my parents confirmed they were using the money because they deserved a break, and the recent social media photos from their trip, with my laptop bag visibly in frame. Cecilia's brow furrowed. "And you didn't authorize any of this?" "No. In fact, I didn't even know the withdrawals happened until they were already out of the country." She flipped through the documents in silence. At one point, she leaned closer and whispered, "They used this for a vacation?" I nodded. "I've seen some shady things," she said. "But this is personal." She stepped out to speak with their fraud department and returned 20 minutes later with a form in hand. "If you're filing a formal complaint, we'll need your signature here. It may take a few weeks, but we'll initiate a freeze on the account pending investigation." I signed it without hesitation. "They may be notified of this action," she warned gently. "If they try to call you, I've already blocked them." Her eyebrows rose slightly, but she said nothing more. As I stood to leave, she added, "And Ms. Carter?" I turned. "You'd be surprised how often the people closest to us are the ones who cross the line first. But that doesn't mean you have to stay on the wrong side of it." I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded. Outside, I sat in my car for a full 10 minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, heart racing. Not from fear, but from the high that comes from finally standing up. That night, I emailed Lily again with an update. Subject: Bank action complete. Fraud report filed. Account frozen. Attaching signed docs plus transaction breakdown. Also attaching deed again, just in case. Ready for next steps. She replied almost instantly. Subject: Let's go. This is exactly what we needed. Now it's time to talk eviction. Those words felt surreal. Evicting your own parents. The idea made my stomach twist. But as I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the chair my mother used to criticize me from, I thought about all the years I'd begged for validation in this house. How many nights I'd cried silently into the same pillow they used to read bedtime stories beside. This wasn't just a house. It had been a prison in slow motion. And now, I finally held the keys to the exit. But first, I needed new locks. Lily's office wasn't big or flashy, but it smelled like fresh coffee and competence. And at that moment, that was all I needed. She met me in the lobby with a warm but focused smile and led me down a narrow hallway lined with framed case victories and legal certifications. Her heels clicked across the linoleum like a metronome, steady and precise, like her mind. We sat down at a small conference table with my folder of evidence spread between us. I watched her scan each document: bank statements, the notarized property deed, screenshots of my parents' public vacation posts, with a level of concentration that made me sit up straighter in my seat. At one point, she paused, removed her glasses, and looked at me. They used your joint account without notification, withdrew every dollar, left the country with it, and the property they abandoned is in your name? I nodded, my voice low. Yes. And they took my laptop too. It had everything: contracts, files, my next few freelance jobs. I haven't even been able to work. She leaned back slowly in her chair, eyes narrowing slightly. Do they have any current claim to the house? Are their names on the deed? Any life tenancy clause or shared ownership paperwork? No, I said. I checked everything. It was a clean transfer back in 2020. I remember because the notary came to the house after Dad's first surgery. Her gaze sharpened. And you've been paying the utilities, groceries, internet, medical supplies? All of it, for over 4 years. She sat up straighter and began typing quickly on her laptop. Then we have 3 things in your favor. 1. Property ownership. 2. Documented financial exploitation via a jointly held account they abused. 3. Proof of abandonment, which makes eviction viable without much resistance, especially if they attempt to re-enter without consent. I blinked. So, what happens now? She looked at me like it wasn't even a question. Now we file for civil fraud. We petition for an eviction order in your local district court, and I draft a cease and desist letter to prevent them from harassing or contacting you once they're notified. My stomach turned slightly. They'll freak out. They already did what they wanted without thinking of the consequences. This is just you responding, not retaliating. You're within your rights, Elena. I exhaled slowly. So what does filing for eviction actually look like? She explained the timeline. 10-day notice to vacate due to abandonment and misuse of property. Then, if they ignore it, court order for forced removal. No criminal charges yet. Just a civil case unless they attempt to re-enter forcibly. But if they do come back and try to break in, she asked carefully. Then we escalate. You'd be protected under homeowner laws. You call the police, hand them the court documents, and that becomes a trespassing case. I felt that word, protected, echo in a space of me that had long gone cold. Protected, for once. She handed me a stack of printed forms, and I signed every line without hesitation. Near the bottom, she added, we'll also prepare a motion to pursue financial restitution. If the court agrees, they'll be ordered to repay part of the money or forfeit anything left in their name. I don't want revenge, I said quietly. I want them out. And I want my life back. She looked up, her voice softer now. You're not getting revenge. You're enforcing consequences. That's a boundary, not a battle. The session ended with a final scan of the documents, a digital copy saved in my inbox, and one key sentence that she left me with as I stood to go. You may have been the daughter in that house, Elena, but now you're the owner. Those words hit deeper than any insult ever had. I stepped out into the cold air with my folder tucked tight under my arm. The sun was beginning to set, and the shadows of winter were crawling in early. But inside, something else was beginning to rise. Power. The kind that comes when you finally stop asking people to care, and start caring enough about yourself to act. As I pulled into my driveway that evening and stared at the home they left behind, I knew what the next step was. It was time to change the locks. The locksmith arrived just after noon the next day. He was a quiet, older man with a wiry beard and a name tag that said Terry. He didn't ask many questions, just looked at the front door, then back at me with a small nod. You the owner? Yes, I said, pulling the folded deed from my coat pocket. It's all in my name. He didn't need to see it, but I wanted to say it out loud. I needed to hear myself say it again. He got to work without fuss, tools clinking softly, the metallic pop of the cylinder being pulled, the quiet, satisfying rhythm of rebuilding something small but significant. As he worked, I stood in the living room and looked around at the space I had spent so many years treating like a museum. Everything had been arranged to their liking: the lace doilies, the outdated floral wallpaper, the dusty wedding china they refused to use but insisted on displaying. It had never really felt like mine. But now I could breathe. The final click of the new lock echoed through the hallway like a gunshot. Terry handed me the new set of keys. There you go. Front door, back door, and garage all rekeyed. No one with an old copy's getting in. I held the keys like they weighed 100 pounds. He tipped his cap and walked back to his truck. I watched him leave, then closed the door slowly and locked it from the inside. My lock, my key. I turned the deadbolt twice. It was done. The next hour was a whirlwind of motion. I removed the cheap curtains Mom had hung, opened every window to let the stale air out, lit a lavender candle that had sat untouched for over a year in the drawer she called too strong. Then I took a box upstairs and began collecting their things. Not everything, just enough to send a message. My dad's slippers, my mom's crossword book, her bottle of imported lotion she never let anyone else use, a stack of framed family photos where I wasn't even in the frame. Each item went into the box without hesitation. By late afternoon, I taped a manila envelope to the inside of the front gate. Inside, a notice to vacate, signed by Lily, notarized and legal. It clearly stated their abandonment of the property, the pending eviction filing, and the financial claim I had initiated for fraud and unauthorized use of funds. A formal cease and desist letter was attached. So was a copy of the deed just to remind them. I didn't scream. I didn't call. I let the paper speak. Then, for the first time in years, I sat in the living room, barefoot and unbothered, and played the jazz music my father used to call noise. I curled up in the recliner he always said was his, and sipped a glass of red wine I bought with my card. The freedom didn't come like fireworks, it came like a breeze. I cleaned out the pantry, tossed expired cans, cleared the fridge of food I never liked but was always told to eat. I even found an old bag of my favorite pasta tucked in the back behind the prune juice. It felt like a hidden apology from the universe. I cooked for myself that night. Just for me. No one looking over my shoulder. No one judging the amount of butter I used. No snide remarks about how you'll never keep a man cooking like that. I ate in silence, peaceful, free. Then I turned on my laptop, my old one, thank God I had a backup, and opened the freelance job boards. I updated my resume, cleaned up my LinkedIn profile, bookmarked a few part-time gigs. They had taken so much from me. But they hadn't taken everything. They couldn't take this version of me. The one who locked her own doors. The one who knew her worth wasn't measured by how many wounds she could endure without complaint. The one who had stopped asking to be seen and had started showing up for herself. That night, I lay in bed with the new locks in place and the soft glow of moonlight casting long shadows across the floor. No voices through the walls. No whispered judgments outside my door. Just me, in my house. Where the only person I had to justify myself to anymore was the woman I was becoming. It was a Tuesday afternoon when it happened. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of stillness that comes after school hours, but before the evening dog walkers begin their rounds. I was in the middle of folding laundry when I heard it. The gate rattled. At first, I thought it was a delivery, but then came the knock. Not timid, not hesitant, just the kind of knock you use when you think everything still belongs to you. I peeked through the side window. It was them. Dad stood at the gate in a wrinkled travel jacket, suitcase beside him, tan lines sharp against his neck. Mom was beside him, visibly irritated, arms crossed, tapping her foot like someone had stood her up for brunch. I didn't move, I watched. And then he shouted, loud and annoyed, "Elena, open the damn gate!" I flinched, not because of the volume, but because of the entitlement. The voice of a man who never thought he could be locked out, who never once believed his daughter would choose herself over his authority. I stayed behind the curtain and hit record on my phone. He pounded again. "I know you're in there, don't be ridiculous, open the door!" Mom stepped forward then, her voice sharper, colder. "Elena, this is not funny. We raised you. This house is ours." I opened the window just a crack and said clearly, calmly, "No, it's not. It hasn't been for 5 years. You gave it to me." That stopped them. Dad's eyebrows rose, shocked that I had dared to speak, that I hadn't cowered behind the door like I used to when he raised his voice. Mom recovered first. "Oh, don't be dramatic," she snapped. "We didn't give it to you. It was for legal purposes. That doesn't mean—" "It means exactly what it says," I replied. "Your names aren't on the deed. You abandoned the property. You drained my account. You left. And now you don't live here anymore." Dad stepped closer to the gate and grabbed the top bar. "Don't push this, Elena. You're being ungrateful. You think this is going to end well for you?" I held up the manila envelope I had prepared and slid it through the small slot in the gate's mailbox. "Your notice," I said. "You've been formally evicted. You've got 10 days to respond. You're not allowed on the property." He didn't even touch the envelope, just stared at it like it might bite him. Mom's face paled as she leaned forward and hissed, "You filed against us? Your own parents?" "You did this," I said. "You took my money, my work, my trust. You made this choice the moment you walked away and left me with nothing." Dad's mouth curled. "You're gonna regret this." I stepped out from behind the curtain then, through the front door, onto the porch, arms crossed, no fear left in me. "No," I said. "I regret waiting this long." They both stood there stunned. I don't know what they expected to see. Maybe a nervous little girl with shaky hands and tear-filled eyes. Maybe the daughter who begged to be heard, who cooked their meals and folded their clothes and prayed they'd someday say, "We're proud of you." Instead, they saw a woman with legal paperwork in one hand and new keys in the other. They stood there a while longer. Dad mumbled something under his breath. Mom whispered at him to stop making a scene. Eventually they turned, dragging their suitcase down the sidewalk like strangers without a home. As they disappeared down the street, I walked back inside, locked the door, and exhaled. I didn't cry. I didn't collapse. I just stood still, letting the silence settle around me like armor. They had come home to reclaim control, but all they found was a locked gate and a daughter who no longer needed their approval to breathe. They were back again the next day. I'd barely finished my coffee when the gate clanged, harder this time, followed by shouting. "Elena!" Dad yelled, his voice sharp and biting. "This is still our house. You're not keeping us out." I didn't answer. Instead, I checked that my phone was fully charged and opened the camera app. Just like Lily had advised. Document everything. Don't engage. Let the law work for you. Mom banged on the gate with her umbrella. "This is absolutely absurd. You have no right to do this to your own family." But I did, and I had the documents to prove it. Then, without warning, Dad reached through the bars and rattled the gate hard, shouting, "If you don't open this, I'll find a way in." That was enough. I backed away and called 911, voice steady. "Hi, yes, I'm the homeowner at 129 Cedar Ridge Lane. My parents, former residents, are trespassing and threatening to enter unlawfully. There's a pending eviction notice, filed and documented. I need police presence immediately." The dispatcher's voice was calm. "Officers are en route. Stay inside. Do not confront them. Already not planning to, I muttered, hanging up. Within 10 minutes, the red and blue lights painted the driveway. Two officers stepped out, a younger woman with a clipboard and a stocky middle-aged man who looked like he'd seen every kind of domestic standoff in the book. I met them at the door, documents in hand, heart pounding beneath my sweater. "Are you Ms. Carter?" the woman asked. "Yes. This is my property. Here's the deed, the filed eviction notice, the bank fraud report, and a cease and desist letter from my attorney." She nodded, flipping through the papers while the male officer approached the gate. Dad's voice immediately shifted from rage to rehearsed politeness. "Officer, thank God. My daughter's confused. She's locked us out of our own home. We just got back from a vacation and she's completely overreacting." "Sir," the officer said firmly, "this gate is locked because you're no longer authorized to be here. The deed doesn't have your name. There's a formal eviction notice filed. That makes this trespassing." Dad blinked, confused. "But I'm her father." The officer didn't flinch. "That doesn't make it legal." Mom stepped in, voice trembling with forced emotion. "But we raised her. We supported her for years. Now she's throwing us out like garbage?" I could hear her from the porch, but I stayed silent. The younger officer returned to me and handed back the papers. "Everything's clean and properly filed. You've handled this by the book." "What happens now?" I asked, voice low. "We'll give them one warning," she said. "Then if they come back, it becomes a criminal matter." Out at the gate, the male officer lowered his tone but didn't back down. "Sir, ma'am, you need to leave the property, now. You can challenge the eviction in court, but until then, you are legally trespassing. If you refuse to leave or return again, you will be arrested." My father stood stiffly, his hands balled into fists. But for the first time, he said nothing. My mother, for all her pride and performance, looked pale. They turned. No more yelling, no more threats, just quiet retreat, dragging their suitcase behind them for the second time in 2 days, only now, with officers watching. I closed the door behind me and slid the deadbolt. Then I leaned against it, let my breath out slow, and realized something I never expected to feel. Relief, not triumph, not vengeance, just quiet, settled relief. The kind you feel when you know the chaos is no longer in control. That night, I wrote everything down in a journal I hadn't touched in years. I wanted to remember every detail, not for spite, but for proof. Proof that I could protect myself. Proof that I wasn't just the burden they claimed I was. I was a woman who stood up, stood her ground, and chose herself. And for the first time in decades, that felt like enough. I didn't sleep much the night before the hearing. Not out of fear, just anticipation. That low thrum of nerves when you know you're about to walk into a room where the people who hurt you will try to make you look like the villain. I wore a navy blue blouse and black slacks, professional, composed. Not dramatic, not angry, just grounded. Lily met me outside the courthouse with her usual no-nonsense air and a cup of coffee I didn't ask for but needed. "You good?" she asked. I nodded. "Good enough." Inside the courtroom, my parents sat side by side on the bench opposite us. Mom was in pearls. Dad wore the same old blazer he used to wear to church, like they thought dressing up might earn them sympathy points. They wouldn't look at me. The case was civil. Elena Carter vs. Henry and Marlene Carter. Charges: financial abuse, fraudulent withdrawal from a joint account, and illegal re-entry attempt to private property post-eviction notice. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, skimmed through our documents silently for a full 3 minutes before looking up. "You've filed for restitution of stolen funds, legal eviction, and have attached a bank report citing suspicious activity initiated by one of the defendants?" Lily stood. "Yes, Your Honor. My client was financially exploited by her parents through a dormant joint account. The house in question is in her name alone. The defendants left the property for weeks, used her money for personal luxury, and upon return attempted unlawful re-entry after formal eviction notice. The judge turned to my parents. "Do you have counsel?" Dad cleared his throat. "No, ma'am. We're representing ourselves." She raised an eyebrow. "Very well. Please proceed." Dad stood slowly, as if this were a courtroom drama. He launched into a half-sincere, half-condescending speech about how family matters shouldn't be resolved with lawyers, how they were just taking a much-needed break, and didn't think Elena would react so severely. Then he tried to spin it. "I added money to that account for years," he said. "And yes, I took some out, but it wasn't theft. She's our daughter." The judge didn't blink. "Your name was on the account, but the pattern of behavior, especially combined with the abandonment of property, makes this more than a misunderstanding." Mom jumped in, her voice trembling, not with tears, but with anger. "We gave her everything. She lived under our roof, ate our food. She's not some victim. She's ungrateful." Lily didn't even stand. She just slid one paper toward the judge. A printed spreadsheet of every bill I'd paid since moving in, over $48,000 worth. Silence fell like a stone. The judge flipped through it, then leaned forward. "Ms. Carter," she said, looking at me, "do you wish to say anything before I rule?" I rose slowly. My palms were damp, but my voice was steady. "I spent years trying to prove I was worth something to them. I gave up jobs, comfort, and time because I thought that's what daughters were supposed to do. But when I finally had something of my own, my savings, my work, they took it, without asking, then left. And now they're upset that I finally stood up and said, 'Enough.'" The judge nodded once, then looked down and began writing. 10 minutes later, the gavel dropped. Eviction upheld. Fraud charge moved forward to mediation. Defendants barred from the property. Financial restitution proceedings scheduled. It wasn't dramatic. There was no explosion, no shouting, just cold, clear consequences. My parents sat stunned. For the first time, they weren't in control. Their words hadn't worked. Their titles hadn't mattered. As I left the courtroom, I didn't look back, not even when my mother called out, voice sharp and bitter, "You'll regret this someday." I paused in the hallway, just for a breath, and whispered under mine, "Not a chance." You'd think after a courtroom ruling, things would quiet down. But small towns have long memories and even longer tongues. It didn't take long for whispers to slither through the streets of our neighborhood, through coffee shop counters, post office lines, and church parking lots. My parents had always worn the mask of dignity. My dad was once a deacon. My mom hosted bake sales and smiled through clenched teeth. To the outside world, they were respectable, stable, good people. So when word spread that they had been evicted by their own daughter, the rumors started like a slow leak and then burst like a flood. "Did you hear about Henry and Marlene? I always thought something was off about that house." "She sued them? What kind of child does that?" They didn't get the full story, of course. People rarely do. Truth gets twisted into whatever narrative makes the teller feel safest. I knew what they were saying about me, that I was ungrateful, that I must have gone bitter after the layoff, that I was never quite right after moving back in. My phone buzzed constantly, for days, not from my parents, not anymore, but from extended family members I hadn't heard from in years, cousins, aunts, even my godmother. Some messages were cautious, curious, others were downright vicious. "What happened with your mom and dad? They're devastated. I can't believe you'd humiliate them like this. Is this about the money? You've always been so obsessed with being right." One cousin wrote, "Family is more important than pride." I didn't respond to a single one, because they weren't there. They didn't see the night my mother screamed at me for forgetting to buy her yogurt after I had just come from a 12-hour shift. They didn't hear my father tell me I was a parasite when I couldn't afford to cover his phone bill. They weren't standing in the kitchen when I found out I'd been erased from my own savings account. The people who judged me had only seen the masks. They never lived inside the lies. But someone else called, and I wasn't expecting her. Rachel. My sister. I stared at her name on my screen for a full minute before I answered. Elena, she said quickly. I've been trying to stay out of all this, but Mom called me crying. Said you threw them out like dogs. I didn't speak. She hesitated. I know things weren't perfect. But this? Lawyers? Police? I finally said, do you know they emptied my savings account? Silence. Do you know they took my laptop? Left for the Bahamas? Lied about it? More silence. I paid for Dad's prescriptions. I took care of their taxes for 2 years. I paid the bills when they couldn't. I gave up job interviews to stay home when Mom didn't feel well. And the second they had a chance, they cut me off, took my money, and vanished. When she finally spoke again, her voice was quieter. I didn't know it was like that. You didn't want to. We both sat in that silence. Then she offered the thing I least expected. I'm sorry. I didn't say anything back. I wasn't ready to forgive. Rachel had always been the golden child, married young, moved to another state, sent holiday cards and nothing more. She never came home, never looked close enough to see what I was carrying. But I didn't need her to apologize for them. I just needed her to stop pretending this was my fault. After we hung up, I took a walk around the neighborhood. A few people glanced at me, then away. Others smiled awkwardly. One woman crossed the street altogether. But I walked with my head high. Let them talk. Let them spin their versions. Because at the end of the day, they didn't own this house. They didn't live inside these walls. And for the first time in my life, neither did the people who broke me. The silence in the house no longer felt like abandonment. It felt like peace. The kind you only experience after surviving noise that tried to convince you it was normal. I began to rebuild. Not the house. That part was easy. A few deep cleanse, a fresh coat of paint, replacing the curtains with ones that actually made me smile. No more faded beige or inherited floral. I bought soft blues and muted golds. Warm. Calm. Mine. But the harder part was rebuilding myself. At first, it felt foreign, setting goals just for me. Making breakfast without the pressure of being watched. Walking barefoot across the kitchen floor without being told I was tracking dirt. I reopened my freelance profile, reached out to past clients. The laptop I had used before the stolen one was slower, older, but it did the job. I worked late into the night, sipping tea and hearing nothing but the sound of my own thoughts again. No criticism, no sighs, no guilt hovering in the air like smoke. Within 2 weeks, I'd landed 3 small contracts. Within a month, I had enough to make rent. If I had rent, which I didn't, because the house was mine. I'd never known this kind of freedom. Not when I lived with them. Not even when I'd first moved out years ago, before I was pulled back in. This wasn't just independence. This was ownership. I started sleeping better, eating better, laughing again, quietly at first, then with full, head-back joy when I reconnected with old friends. People I had slowly pushed away over the years because I was always taking care of things at home. One afternoon, while clearing out the upstairs closet, I found an old box of books I had once loved. Books I'd shelved away when Mom said they were too heavy, too dark, not good for your spirit. I stacked them on my nightstand, read every single one. Then came the garden. It started with one small patch in the back, overgrown, forgotten, and full of weeds. I pulled them out by hand, cleared the soil, bought bulbs and seeds with my own money. I planted lavender, rosemary, and tulips. Each morning, I'd sit by the window with my tea and watch the sun fall over that tiny patch of dirt and color. It became a ritual, a reminder that things do grow back, sometimes stronger, sometimes better, especially when the roots finally have room. One day, I walked down the hallway and paused outside the door that used to be my parents' bedroom. I hadn't touched it since they left, not out of sentiment, just avoidance. But that day, I opened it, stripped the bedding, donated the clothes, tore down the yellowing wallpaper Mom had insisted was timeless. I turned that room into a creative studio. Clean walls, open space, a desk by the window, a whiteboard where I wrote down everything I wanted for my future, without apologies. At the top of the list, in bold, no more begging to be loved the way I deserve. I bought a small painting online that read, "Boundaries are the highest form of self-respect." It now hangs above the mantel where the old family photo used to be. Friends began coming over again, slowly, carefully, like they didn't want to intrude on something fragile. But I wasn't fragile anymore. I was shaping something new. One evening, my friend Ava dropped by with a bottle of wine and a loaf of sourdough. "I barely recognize this place," she said, eyes wide. "It finally looks like someone lives here, like someone's alive in here." I smiled. She is. We toasted on the porch, the same porch where I used to sit alone, watching my family laugh without me. This time, the laughter was mine. Not performative, not conditional, just mine. It came in the mail on a rainy Wednesday. No return address, just my name scrawled in unmistakable handwriting across a pale blue envelope I hadn't seen in years. The kind my mother used when she wrote holiday letters or scolded relatives through cursive. I held it for a moment too long. Not fear, just familiarity. That old tug in the chest, the one that whispers, "Maybe this time it's different." I sat at the kitchen table, the rain tapping against the windows like a metronome counting the seconds of my hesitation. Part of me wanted to throw it away, leave it sealed, let the silence be the answer. But another part, the daughter who still lingered deep down, needed to know what she'd written. I opened it. Inside was one sheet of stationery, folded crisply. "Elena, I don't know what's left to say. Maybe we didn't do everything right. Maybe we made mistakes. But you didn't have to make it public. You didn't have to humiliate us. I hope you're happy now." Mom, that was it. No apology, no acknowledgement of what they took, no mention of the money, no regret for calling me a burden, no remorse for draining my savings, no mention of love, just the echo of pride pretending to be hurt. I folded the letter, walked to the kitchen sink, and watched the paper soak slowly under the faucet. The ink bled like it was trying to escape itself. I didn't bother to tear it. It unraveled on its own. Some endings don't require closure. Some stories don't deserve the epilogue. I wiped my hands dry and opened the front door to let in the smell of rain. Across the street, the trees swayed under the weight of wind, but my house stood firm. This house that was once theirs. This house that watched me be overlooked, dismissed, erased. Now it was mine. I walked to the front gate, looked out toward the road where they had once stood shouting, demanding, daring me to make them leave, and I felt nothing. Not hatred, not longing, just peace, because I finally understood something I hadn't been ready to face until now. They were never going to choose me the way I chose them. And that's not my burden to carry anymore. Later that night, I lit a candle in the living room and sat beneath the painting that now hung where their photo once did. Boundaries are the highest form of self-respect. The wax burned slow, the flame flickered with quiet strength. I didn't cry, I didn't ache, I just exhaled. And with that, the past finally let go of me. Spring came early that year. The tulips bloomed brighter than I remembered, stubborn little things pushing through cold soil like they had something to prove. I knelt by the garden one morning, fingers deep in dirt, planting lavender around the edge of the walkway. The sun warmed my back. Birds chirped overhead. It wasn't loud or cinematic. It was gentle, a kind of stillness I hadn't known before. I looked up at the house. My house. It wasn't grand. It still needed a new coat of paint on the garage. The gutters needed clearing. But it stood like I did. Solid, earned, reclaimed. Later that week, I hosted dinner. Not for family, for friends. Chosen people. Ava brought wine. Jamal from my freelance circle brought lasagna. Even Mrs. Price from 3 doors down, who once asked if I was all right living alone, brought her famous cornbread and an awkward smile that, this time, felt real. We sat at the table I once cleared for others, passing plates, trading stories, laughing loud and unashamed. I didn't need to shrink myself. I didn't need to perform goodness to earn space. Halfway through dessert, Ava raised her glass and said, "To Elena, for reminding us that sometimes the most radical thing a woman can do is protect her peace." They all cheered. I didn't expect that. I didn't expect how good it would feel not just to survive, but to belong. After they left, I stood in the doorway watching the taillights disappear down the street. The night was cool. The stars stubbornly poked through a cloudy sky. I could hear wind chimes from someone's porch. And I smiled. Not the performative smile I used to wear like armor. Not the tight, polite smile I gave while being dismissed. But a real one. Wide, quiet, proud. I closed the door, turned the deadbolt, my lock, my key, and walked barefoot into the quiet warmth of my living room. I curled up with a book and a blanket, candle flickering beside me, and for the first time in years, I didn't brace for footsteps or sighs or doors slamming in disapproval. There was no one to tiptoe around, no one to fear, no one to answer to but me. And I liked her, this woman I had become, this woman who survived the storm and rebuilt from the foundation up. She wasn't just a daughter anymore. She was a homeowner, a fighter, a woman who had learned that some families aren't safe havens, but that doesn't mean you have to keep standing in the fire. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who whispered, "Maybe someday they'll see me." And I wanted to hold her hand and say, "They didn't, but you did, and that's what saved us." I turned off the lamp, slid the last lock into place, and whispered into the quiet, "My name, my key, my future."